you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. I'm Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and joining me as ever is the aristocratic Ian Hardingham.
Hello. Last week I announced a fund to get other people to make games about me. You can get half your development paid for if you're making a game about me.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
Fail Better Games, creators of Sunless Sea and Fallen London, have started a new fund to help people who want to make games not about them, but with a focus on narrative. Apparently they are particularly interested in text-based games, e.g. those made with Twine. Would you rather have a number of focused funds, such as this one, or a couple of massive funds, such as the Indie Fund?
I'd rather have focused funds, actually. I really like the idea that this is going to make some sort of slightly more professional text-based games. These guys talking about they want to give people between £2,000 and £20,000 as a budget. So we're very much talking, single man stuff generally, especially if it's a text adventure. And frankly, I'd quite like to see some text adventures with production values. I don't really know what that looks like yet. But that's really exciting to me, and I don't think there's very much risk here for Fail Better. There's probably about $1 million or something in this fund. The terms are reasonably interesting. They don't ask for full recoup. They get 50% until they get their money back, and then 20% after that, which is a bit unusual not to get 100% until they get their investment back. Not totally sure about that 20% at the end, but this is really for kind of smaller stuff. This is actually about making games that are not really commercially viable right now to happen, and that's cool.
Yeah, I really like this. It's going to be a huge factor in encouraging people to work in this format. There's obviously a huge interactive fiction community who should be really interested in this. And it's a way of supporting those who can't afford a budget to make a huge game, make a graphical game. So I really like this. I mean, yeah, the deal terms are kind of interesting. Also, this kind of thing where you're conflating something that has a cultural artistic motivation with a commercial motivation is often a bit difficult. So I can imagine a lot of people in this space getting annoyed about the fact that this is set up, to be commercially good for Fail Better. I think that's probably the only thing that's controversial about this is, you could make an argument that maybe this should be a grant rather than this kind of fund.
Yeah, I basically completely agree with that. I think this is sort of... It clearly is a good thing for Fail Better, except for the fact that I've just imagined that most of the games they're funding really are in danger of not recouping. That's kind of the side that makes me feel a little less concerned about any cynicism on Fail Better's part. So, yeah, maybe it'd be better as a grant, although, generally, again, there are a lot of amateur Twine games, text adventure games. That kind of exists. And actually, there's something about this being a somewhat commercial prospect that I really like. And again, I'm kind of fine with it. I'm sort of, again, it's such a weird point to really harp on about, but this 50% recoup at the beginning thing is quite interesting because in most situations, you've got the money to make your game, and then you're not making any more money from it until it's reached, quite a high level of success, really. Yeah. And in this case, you'll start getting money straight away extra, which is quite nice. They could have done this in a way that was completely unquestionable, completely uncriticizable, and they haven't done that. It could be a grant. Again, though, would I rather this was a grant with the sort of lowered expectation then that things will actually be released? I like the idea that Fail Better will have a tiny bit of oversight, will maybe give people advice once they've taken the funding. And maybe, again, I want to see what a commercial text adventure looks like nowadays.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And something else about this that's good is curation. I'd probably be a lot more likely to play something that Failbetter had funded that was being released as a commercial product than I would to play a lot of the free IF out there. We both have this. If something is put forward as a commercial product, it just kind of implies that it's been worked on to a greater degree, and maybe there's a greater scope to it, or it's something that's worth the time to consider. Also, sorting through all of that stuff is extremely difficult. Even if you play sort of IF comp entries, which I did one year and was very interesting, even among the winners, there are a lot of things that aren't necessarily easy to get on with straight away. So I would expect this to be sort of a more accessible game.
Yeah, and there really isn't any other genre very much like interactive fiction. We could start a fund to make tactical games, but that wouldn't produce, I don't think, very much particularly interesting beyond all the stuff that people are doing already. Whereas I really think there is space for people to go further with interactive fiction. I feel like I haven't played a lot. You've played a lot more than I have in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I just still feel like there's some breakthroughs to be made. I think it would be nice to see. I don't know. I would like to see someone from a traditional games background take a look at some of the mechanics that maybe you could improve. I mean, I know that it's also an area that has a lot of experimentation.
Yeah.
But as you say, curation, I'm really likely to play these things as they come out.
We haven't had a breakthrough IF game, I think, yet. I mean, outside stuff that wraps some IF tropes in other things, in graphical things or in another format. I'm thinking specifically of text games.
Yeah, I agree. We haven't.
Yeah.
And we should have.
I know, and that's interesting to me. I mean, I think the audience for that is quite small still. I mean, obviously, Depression Quest is an interesting game because that's been the most prominent Twine game certainly ever, and obviously deeply controversial game for a huge variety of reasons. So it had a big cultural impact. That's the only one I can think of that's really kind of broken out. And then you think about people like Porpentine, whose games are kind of well known in game design circles, but you wouldn't call those games sort of necessarily breakout games. I know she released a compilation on Steam, but that didn't seem to kind of get that much traction. So yeah, we're still looking for our breakthrough stuff. Maybe this will help create that.
Let's hope so.
After building a games program for the University of Texas, Warren Spector has decided to get back to proper development. He has joined Otherside Entertainment full-time in order to work on System Shock 3 and Underworld Ascendant. Is Spector's involvement essential for a successful System Shock 3?
Well, probably not.
No.
I'm still a little bit dubious of how much this will have an impact. I've been reading this interview with him. He's very excited to be involved. It's still a little bit unclear to what extent he's going to have design control. And he was also very much involved in Deus Ex 2, a game which wasn't very good, a sequel to a great game. That was when he let Harvey Smith have design control. So, a lot of the stuff that I've got from Warren Spector in the last 10 years, and this is pretty critical, so I do apologise in advance, but I don't get the impression he's incredibly passionate about creating games of a certain type that he really cares about. Like, I don't get the feeling that he has a burning desire to move these genres forward. I'm not entirely sure what is driving him. And again, I have a huge amount of respect for the man, but he's not someone who I think has a artistic vision that he's desperately trying to get made. So, hopefully he can give some oversight and maybe say that some design decisions are going in the right direction or the wrong direction. But this is very much not like the next Warren Spector album for me. If I'm a huge Warren Spector music fan, this is not going to scratch that itch for me.
I think this is an interesting situation because it really plays into the way the games press attribute things to a single person. Obviously, there are some hallmarks of things he's done in his career, and a lot of the stuff he's been associated with is, fantastic design and quite rightly so. But when I was looking at this, I kind of realized that I don't know what exactly he brought to those things, and nobody really does, and it's sort of difficult to separate out certainly a person from a team or a person in a specific era, even if they do have a lot of control. So I don't know. This is exciting to me because I think maybe he's coming back with something to prove in this kind of game, and that would be good. Like you say, if he has some burning desire to do something, and it would take somebody who's left games for a long time and has been very successful in academia. He's massively well regarded, to actually come back sort of into the trenches to some extent, to go full time. I think you must have some kind of big motivation there, so it could be good.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he does say at one point near the end that he basically doesn't think the stakes are particularly high, and that if it doesn't work out, he'll, and I quote, do another startup or something. Again, I mean, you're right that the majority of developers, you don't get a really good feeling about exactly what they're bringing to the table. I feel like I know what Ken Levine is bringing to the table. John Carmack as well, to a certain extent. There are people at the very top where I feel like I understand their artistic values. Kojima as well. But I really don't with Spectre. I don't know if he's just a really good project manager who was able to get the best out of his team. I don't know what about Deus Ex he loves. Like, I don't know what about that thing was the thing that drove him forward. Was it the freedom? Was it the kind of the freeform level design? Was it the fact it was a bit like a film plot? I just don't know that. I think it's good. It's nice him getting back in. It's just that he's not starting his own studio, picking his own staff, putting balls to the wall and doing something really crazy. He's kind of coming on board in what still looks a bit like a glorified advisor role. I mean, what do I think about System Shock 3? System Shock 1 and 2 are really, really amazing. And we've talked about System Shock 2 in the past. I think I'm a bigger fan than you are. But these two are really, really awesome, authentic 90s PC games that I'm a huge fan of. I don't know if there's been a single revamping of a franchise a decade later, a gaming franchise that I'm really on board with. I think about Thief 4.
Ugh.
We talked about the Hitman, the recent Hitman, and the Hitman that's coming out as well.
Yeah.
These games, even when they get extremely good reviews, same is true of Deus Ex 3, when they get extremely good reviews and people seem to like them a lot, they completely alienate me. They often go in a kind of slightly more cinematic direction, and they lose a lot of the things that I personally like. So I will certainly be surprised if I have a lot of time for System Shock 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're being slightly unfair to Warren Spector there. I mean, I think his design values in terms of freedom of choice are certainly very well known. That was what he would always be interviewed about. We had a topic on this very show a very long time ago about how he responded to Gabe Newell saying that you should replicate a good player experience every single time. He had that response article on Eurogamer.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Right, so he has been kind of very out there with his specific design tenets. It's interesting that he's gone to Otherside, who are this company who are very much predicated on bringing back properties, and it has this kind of retro connotation to it, and I think that could be positive. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on reboots. I've not seen anything rebooted ever that I've been excited about ever in any form, be it film, be it TV, or be it games. I really feel that reboots are generally about capitalizing on nostalgia, and they try and shoehorn the nostalgia into a modern format, and that tends to impoverish both the modern format by making it too conservative and the nostalgia by diluting it in what's perceived to be a sort of marketable way. So I don't like reboots. But this is an interesting combination.
Yeah, one of the things that is very sort of common amongst these big games reboots is that they tend to be oddly polished, and whereas very often they would be sequels to games that pushed the medium forward and had a sort of a more open feeling to the design, these tend to have quite a conservative gestation. And they tend to have more pared down, more polished mechanics. I mean, that's a bit of a crazy wide point, but that's sort of how I feel about it. Like the ones that are reviewed well, and I actually include the recent XCOM remake in this as well. The ones that are reviewed really well, they've got an extremely polished feel to them, and a lot of the higher level sort of strategic decisions you're making in those games are quite polished, whereas they're often sequels to games who manage to create a really awesome system or simulation within them that led to really great experiences and strategic decisions, sort of specifically in strategy games. That's for me why it doesn't work. But, I mean, Tom Francis, who we respect a lot, he loves Deus Ex 3. A lot of people do, so it's a somewhat subjective matter. Just to bring the listeners up to date on what the thing we were talking about with Gabe Newell and Warren Spector, Gabe Newell pushed the opinion that if you had a game that had emergence in it and you were watching a playtesting session and something really amazing, an emergent thing that was really awesome happened to one player, then you should immediately capture that and make sure that happened for every player. And it was one of the perfect sort of game design disagreements, because that's like a lot of people respond extremely badly to that idea. That takes away a lot from what people get from computer games, from the fact that something is actually emergent. You want to feel like you can be the only person who saw something great. But it's also a really valid opinion as well. And
yes,
and finding the right balance there is really key. And it did surprise me a little bit that at the time Warren Spector was willing to slightly get into it with Gabe Newell. So yeah, lots of props for that. But it's still, I don't want to be unfair to Warren Spector, but I don't feel him selling any kind of vision that he wants to get done.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I'll be interested to see what they announce. I mean, all of the stuff you've talked about there is really salient in game design at the moment, especially with bigger games. They've gone further and further and further down that conservative route to just, emphasize basically the kind of the assets that they're throwing at the player and make sure that those are maximized as much as possible. I mean, it's interesting playing something like Metal Gear Solid, which I am at the moment.
Oh, good.
Yeah. To see where more freeform game design can actually have a really good place in a AAA title. I mean, that game is crazy. So it does have that going for
I mean,
it.
the game's completely mad, but really it feels like the most sort of salient hypothesis that anyone's come up with on this stuff is it's just about not knowing what the rules are. And you don't know what the rules are at Metal Gear Solid, because at any time it could do something even more insane. And that's so exciting that you can go into such a big budget and great game and not know what all of the little decisions are happening. And yeah, I feel like a lot of these reboots, even if I've never played them before, it's so kind of clear that they're just presenting me with a, on the surface, interesting decision. But it's just sort of really immediately obvious that is feeding into a very simple system. And it's fine to have a simple system behind stuff. I think there are lots of simple systems behind Metal Gear. But if it's really well obfuscated from you and you have no idea, and there are so many of them interacting, then that doesn't matter, because you don't know. It's still an interesting and mysterious system.
I think with those AAA games that lean towards that, like Thief 4 and Human Revolution, the reason I find that so offensive is I kind of would prefer that they didn't even try. It's almost patronizing the extent to which they basically sandbox, no pun intended, that stuff. So it's really just a sort of, you can have a bit of freeform stuff if you want. In Thief, you can just go into all of these empty houses and take stuff. And that's sort of their nod to emergent gameplay. And in Deus Ex Human Revolution, you've got sort of customization and stuff. And I think, some non-linear mission choices and so on. And it's just really pathetic. Like, I'd rather that you would just be honest and be a linear game than do that.
Yeah, I mean, just having two different branches to a mission is dated now. Like, that's not exciting. That doesn't mean that you've given the player a meaningful choice. It just hasn't. Good. It's turned into a good rant.
It's an epic topic. We should move on. Vive now. Pre-orders have opened for the Vive, a VR headset co-engineered by HTC and Valve. The headset will cost $800 and comes with laser positioning base stations and custom motion controllers. I think most people are aware of the Vive by now. It's certainly been rumored to be the most exciting VR system. Is it too expensive?
It's definitely got the most buzz around it right now. I think it's the current front runner for VR, but things can change really quickly. I don't actually particularly think it's expensive in a way that's going to stop VR taking off. No. It doesn't appear that anyone can make a cheap, good VR headset, so it's not like they're suddenly going to get undercut by someone else. And if this is good enough to become crossover and mainstream, this generation, which is the only question we're interested in answering, then it won't matter that it's $800 because the early adopters will buy it and it will be a massively exciting premium thing and people will start making cheaper versions.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely established that Oculus and Vive are for an enthusiast market. Oculus needs to break through to a mass market eventually, and the Vive does not. And that's interesting because it really enables Valve to make something that's technically great that might just be sort of in a difficult price range. But yeah, I feel like for really early adopters, people who are really excited about VR and want to get into it, this is an okay price. And we were critical of Oculus, but that's because Vive is positioned very much as Valve sort of dipping their toe in the water and finding out what works technically for a very hardcore audience. I mean, I will be buying one of these. I'm definitely happy to spend that on it. It's very exciting. It's a new thing. And that seems fine to me. On the other side of this, you've got Gear VR, which is going to be bundled with the new Samsung phone.
Yeah, I saw
and
that.
Massively bullish predictions on, crazy numbers for mobile VR sales. Financial people are going nuts for this. They really think it's going to be a huge deal. So maybe that really is going to be where the consumer breakthrough happens.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, but let's get to this mobile phone thing first. I don't buy that the current generation of mobile phone VR is going to be anything more than really a gimmick. But if you're talking about your phone is basically your most expensive gadget, and it's also the one that's most important to you. And it's a thing which people are happy to pay, effectively with contracts and everything. They're paying for a thing which costs usually around £500. That's how much a lot of sort of just basic premium phones cost. So given that there's crossover in functionality, obviously it's a computer, it has a display. It has a display that's getting up to crazy resolutions now. The new Note, the Note 6, I'll be getting at the end of this year. It's rumored to have like a freaking 4K screen or something. So nice. In a lot of ways, that being the way that this happens, it's definitely buy it as a possibility. I'm still got a lot of concerns about VR. I still kind of think that the next stage of the real crossover is actually kind of a Google Glass thing. A kind of picture in glass is a picture over the top of your regular day-to-day stuff. And I know it makes me sort of... It's kind of weird that Google shut down Google Glass. I think they had a lot of political problems with it. I'm kind of ranging around, but I also have something that I want to talk about. We talked about Guitar Hero a couple of weeks ago, yes. and you made what I thought was a very good point, that the next Guitar Hero would be in VR. But on reflecting of that, I'm not so sure, because a huge amount of Guitar Hero is about social play. It was about both of you jamming. It was really, really like a social thing. I think was a big driver of success, and that's not going to work very well with VR. I don't think.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, it could work with VR. I think multiplayer VR is really underexplored right now, and we're going to see some stuff there. I was talking, yes, as you probably inferred, despite making that valid response, about the experience of playing an instrument or doing something, experience-driven games. And yes, you're right. The playing in the band thing, I think, was one of the coolest things about Rock Band, and something that is missing. These sort of controls that you have different roles, definitely missing. I mean, yeah, I really am convinced that VR will still be a big deal. I mean, you made a point there, which a lot of people are saying at the moment, that it's actually going to be AR that is the thing that really takes off, and I just don't think that's right. Like, I just don't think AR is relevant to this conversation.
I do think they're two pretty different things.
Right.
So I do basically agree with that.
Yeah, I think fully immersive VR is so different that you shouldn't really talk about them in the same breath. Yeah, of course AR is going to be massive. I mean, just the example I keep giving of like the sat-nav that overlays on the road, that's going to be massive for people like me who hate sat-navs and maps. That's going to be massive. And things like that, there's so many applications of AR. I'm also disappointed that Google stopped stuff on Glass. I'm not sure exactly why that was. And I'm just with the prevailing wind, and I think we've both been ahead of the prevailing wind on VR. Now everyone's saying it's not going to be this generation, and people were definitely saying it definitely would be this generation for about 2 years. So I feel smug about that.
Yeah, I was talking to someone, and he just thought that having the massive headset was a big problem, and who knows if that's true. I mean, if it was just a pair of glasses and that was all you needed and it didn't weigh very much, I mean, that would obviously be a lot better. That doesn't mean necessarily that that's got to happen before this properly takes off. I don't know. I mean, I've always got problems with this, but the thing is, you just won't know until it's happened that it's happened.
Yeah.
It's like, I thought the Wii was crazy. I thought the Wii was a stupid name, and the Wii was huge,
Yeah.
And you just don't know. I mean, like, a lot of people love watching films in VR, and I find that really boggling. But people love the idea that they've got their own cinema, that it's like being in the cinema, but you can do it anywhere. And it's like, well, that's not something that I particularly want to do, but it's kind of happening. I'm still putting my money, as you say, on it not being this generation, but it's like, it's not a safe bet right now.
No, it really isn't. I'm just interested to see, what are going to be the early VR hit games, because these things will get adopted. Like, enough people will buy a Vive that someone will be able to make a VR game for the Vive that is a sort of hit in some way. Not like, I'm not talking like Rocket League here. I'm talking, a sort of mid-range hit, maybe a few $1 million. And that's going to be awesome. That's going to be really, really exciting.
I think it's got to be a space game.
Sure.
I think that's
maybe
that's the most suitable thing. And if it's going to be a hit, it's like, on the other side, what's going to be the hit casual game? Like, what is a casual VR game?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Probably some kind of linear story thing, I would imagine.
Yeah, like a walking simulator. Sure, it could be.
A walking simulator. Yeah, like some experiential thing that's just sort of nice that you can get into very quickly. I would imagine, based on looking at things. There's a game on the Gear which is kind of defined this genre of, like, I think someone called it the laser eyes genre, where you look at stuff to shoot it. You just shoot like spaceships coming towards you, and that seems to be quite a popular, because obviously it works with the Gear's one button interface as well. That's quite a popular genre, so I think there'll be some stuff like that where it's very basic mechanics but uses your eyes. Yeah, it's tremendously exciting. Like, I'm actually happy, and this is something that you would say. I'm happy that this generation is like the crazy expensive generation that doesn't really make sense, because we're going to see interesting creative work. It's not going to be for a mass audience.
Yeah, the rules have not been decided yet. Like, this Valve thing has a much higher fidelity of working out where you are in the room. It's got these two fairly bizarre looking controllers. Everyone's doing something very different. So yeah, it is like something I would say. This is like the exciting Wild West time before it either disappears down the garbage chute or it becomes sort of boring and normal.
GameCloud have a piece up about randomness as part of a series about what makes RTSs fun. This is really interesting, this piece. The author Callum McCall believes that randomness, which augments player choice, is critical in providing fun in RTSs, whereas randomness, which constrains player choice, is detrimental. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of... I think that RNG, random generation, in all games, is like one of the most crucial game design things, and it's also just incredibly hard to understand. It's not well understood. People are starting to take it for granted that random generation... random dice rolls, or RNG as we'll call them here, add excitement to a game. People are starting to accept that. But even that, it doesn't kind of... that in itself is quite a deep theory. Like, it speaks to the hardwiring of our brains, that random series of rewards are pleasurable to us. Like, to take that for granted is fine, and I agree with it. But that's quite a sort of a complex thing to have got to. And then trying to work out how that can interact in a hardcore game with skill, and trying to work that out, and basically it's almost like it's almost like you're making a beer, or you're making a whiskey or something, and you've got to choose the sugar balance, and that like, just a slight difference in sugar can make a huge difference to what the beer ends up tasting like. And that's basically the case with these things. The more luck, the more RNG you put into, say, an RTS, it's going to just start being a different experience. It's very tiring playing a lot of games that don't have any random generation because everything's under your control. So if you want to have a very deep simulation where everything is under your control, that's going to be extremely tiring to play. And it's also going to be, because it's predictable, it's also kind of tiring for a different reason. But obviously, we all think we want control. The games that we make are about having a lot of control. But the key to this piece, and it's something that I would certainly state from my own design, is what you want to happen is that the sort of the randomness to be emergent from the player decisions. That you have a system that is controllable at the micro level, but is so complicated at the macro level that the stuff that comes straightforwardly out of players' actions and interactions creates something that is kind of like looks random, looks different every single time. And I think that's basically kind of what he's saying here. He's very annoyed at Company of Heroes 2 because in Company of Heroes 1, this is great, you'll love this. You can choose the rotation of landmines. You can decide to face them in a certain direction, which is a pretty crazy choice. And they took it out of Company of Heroes 2 and replaced it with kind of just like a random dice roll about how much damage you would do, and that makes the author very upset, and understandably so. Like, he wanted to be able to rotate mines, and the developers didn't. So there you go.
Yeah, taking out a skill-based thing and replacing it with RNG is not generally something that players will enjoy in a sequel. I feel like RNG is very poorly defined and categorized. So if you said to someone, RNG in an RTS, they would think about, variable damage. But of course, RTSs have a lot of innate randomness in them already. Like stuff like if you have two armies that engage, the timing that it takes each of them to fan out. I mean, I'm talking about StarCraft here, and kind of make a concave or shape, whatever, is down to a few different factors, including, I believe, some randomness in terms of where they path, like. If not literal randomness, hard-coded randomness, then effective randomness, because they're all trying to do things in a system at once. So there's randomness like that, and it is effectively random exactly to the pixel where you engage another unit on a map, and that can have implications as well. So there's just all these different types of randomness. I mean, I think that sort of randomized damage and stuff in an RTS setting is a bit off. Like I would find that quite annoying, because you really wouldn't know if you were going to win a specific encounter. You have to have on the flip side of your stress thing, if you have everything as an unknown, then that's incredibly stressful and weird as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I actually don't think there is much excuse for in RTSs. You hit the nail on the head. 20 RTS units trying to pathfind from point A to point B is certainly a complicated enough system to appear random at the top level. And but you think about Alpha Centauri or Civilization, and the hugely dice roll based aspect to any attacks there. And XCOM 2, for instance, it's the percentage chance to do something is so foregrounded to be a huge part of the game in itself. And that's where you're starting to get like you just can't take that out of a game like that. You can't find enough ways of making the game work without having a dice roll at the end of it.
Yeah.
I mean, the RTS genre, I guess, the fewer units you have, the more this is an issue. I mean, again, it's going to be more complicated if you have as many units as Total Annihilation has. Yes. But I'm kind of surprised. I guess Company of Heroes is trying to show you little vignettes of action between a couple of guys and a tank and make it look a little bit filmic. And if you want to get all the proper outcomes of that, you probably need to have random generation in the way that StarCraft 2 probably doesn't need.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's just about sort of inflection. I felt like this article was trying to take a sort of very specific line, and that is a brave thing to do because of the complexity and depth of this topic. But I also felt like I'm not sure that you can refine it to the extent of the thesis here, that you can so directly say what is player choice, enabling and what is player choice constraining.
Yeah, it's probably just something you have to take each decision carefully and also have like a good overview of what your general feelings of what it needs to be are, I suppose. I mean, yeah, I can't get much more coherent than that. But it's not a topic specifically to RTS. It's not a topic I'd thought about before I read this.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Naughty Dog used a piece of Assassin's Creed Black Flag concept art in a trailer for Uncharted 4. The artwork was used with some minor modifications as a painting on the wall of a home. What? Why did this happen? And also, wow.
Naughty Dog. This is like... So the thing that makes me most upset about this is that they didn't just come out and go, yeah, we did. Screw you, Ubisoft. Like, this should be like a thing. Everyone should put pictures of other people's games in their cutscenes. This should just be completely normal. Everyone should do this. I think this is weird. And I think I would have just been like... I would have filmed me and the rest of the development team just like pretending to cry and like just massively taking it back to Ubisoft, just saying like, yeah, you poor little babies, we took your stupid concept art and took the pirate out of it. That's where I stand on this.
I see. I mean, this is obviously going to be a source of social media manager jokes between the companies for years, so I think we're kind of already there with that. I mean, I guess the thing from this is like placeholders are so hard because if you make a completely stupid placeholder or an offensive placeholder, which is what a lot of people do to kind of ensure that something comes across as a placeholder, that can go very wrong. So you can end up with a really stupid one in your game or something rude that shouldn't be there. However, if you use something that's sort of tonally appropriate, which I guess they went for here, they just grabbed something off the internet that was sort of tonally appropriate, then it can get forgotten about. You can get yourself in this situation. So it's really, like, psychologically, picking the right kind of placeholder, I think, is very difficult.
Yeah, I do just... it just annoys me slightly, because I just think it's a bit of a fuss about nothing. Like, we are talking about a painting, in a couple of seconds from a cutscene. Of course, it's salacious on some level. But I mean, I kind of just... It's just a bit of a pity that they apologised so properly for it. I would have just liked them to do something more interesting. And I like that this article, in an attempt to make this into an even bigger story, talks about how a lot of people think that they stole Ellen Page's likeness for the character from The Last of Us. And apparently also Helen Mirren and Jason Statham for characters in Uncharted 3. So we're trying to put this as part of Naughty Dog's character, that they'll just steal anything.
Right, it's consistent. Wasn't there a lawsuit about the Ellen Page likeness?
Yeah, I think there might have been something like that.
It's amazing that we're at that point. Anyway, this whole thing is amazing. Thomas Mahler, director of the studio responsible for Ori and the Blind Forest, believes that excessive secrecy is harming the launch of new consoles, specifically the Nintendo NX. In a post on NeoGAF, he said that keeping things under wraps prevents companies such as his from developing games for new consoles until after they're released. Are Nintendo deliberately excluding smaller developers, or are they just trying to manage the launch of their console effectively?
Well, I don't think they're sort of deliberately saying like all of these small guys are not important enough. I mean, making a console's really hard, and controlling the message on your new console, especially when you're Nintendo, the Nintendo NX, which is like, it's people are very interested. It's not just you and me. Other people are also interested to find out what this Nintendo console is going to look like. My main takeaway from this is that this guy probably needs to not go on NeoGAF after he's had this much wine. Because this is really, like, genuinely a rant. He says goddamn stupid like 3 different times. And then refers to the practice as brain damaged, which is not particularly politically correct. No. He has a couple of good points. He says that Nintendo should be getting Unity and Epic dev kits as soon as possible. But the honest truth is that I'm not really convinced that getting early dev kits really helps developers all that much, because they really do change a lot. I just think that when you make a game for a console as a launch title, you have to be very careful. And unless you're one of the guys doing like the the Uncharted of the launch or something like that, who obviously need to be working every single day to find out what the actual technical limitations are going to be because they're pushing them. The best thing to do is to not push them. I mean, I guess this guy is upset that Nintendo aren't taking him seriously after... I mean, his game, Ori and the Forest or whatever, I think it was very, very successful. And he thinks that Nintendo should be taking him seriously. He's sort of acting a bit like a jilted lover.
This is one of those things where it really looks like someone who doesn't have the... I'm trying to put this as nicely as possible. For some reason, he's not able to do the things that you would need to do to get a dev kit from Nintendo for this console. And he's annoyed about that.
Yeah, it may be true that no one of that size can, like at this stage. I wouldn't necessarily expect us to be able to get a Nintendo NX dev kit right now, because I just don't know what their internal process for it is.
Well, I mean, so by implication, he's saying that he wants to make a launch title, right?
It certainly looks like that would be why he'd be getting so upset about it.
So therefore, I would really like to know what he's done to try and achieve that. If it's nothing, then I have no time for this whatsoever. I just have no time for it. Because the extent to which these things are politically important to companies, the extent to which they have to control... our company, our size, has to control so many details about what we release publicly so that we have the most impact when we release those details. And so that we can plan stuff. And we're a tiny company, and the justification for that is not as hardcore. Nintendo is an enormous multinational public company, so of course they have to be careful about this. And if you want to get into that, you have to put in an enormous amount of time and effort in positioning yourself so that you even have a chance to do that. So I'd much rather that he talked about that and not about this sort of perceived unnecessary behavior around the specs of their new console.
Yeah, I mean, we are slightly going down a rabbit hole with this, but this industry changes so fast that every single new game that you're making is a completely new meta game of trying to get it in the right places. And, I guess that he tried via whatever methods he thought were appropriate to get a dev kit, and he was turned away and got upset about it. I mean, maybe there are other things that you can try, as you say. But to take his comments on face value, how much would it change Nintendo's fortunes with indies if they did send a pre-release dev kit to a lot of indies? Much like Valve are sending the Vive to a lot of indies.
Well, the thing is that would then make the spec public.
Yeah.
And announcing the spec of the console is one of the only trump cards you have as a hardware
developer. But would it even help? Like, even beyond that massive negative, how much of a difference would it make to the software launch lineup? I mean, launch software stuff is a really complicated scenario. It takes a year or two. I mean, really, it takes 2 years for a console to get going, usually. Nintendo are much better at producing first-party launch stuff. They're kind of the company that in some ways needs the third parties least. And they certainly act that way. So even taking his stuff on face value, if I'm a fan of Nintendo, am I frustrated that they are lagging behind in terms of indie relations? I guess so, but then it's very hard for indies to live up to the kind of specific qualities that Nintendo's have in a lot of their own software as well.
The other thing that is now bugging me about this is that he doesn't know what market the NX is aimed at. So why does he know that he wants to put a game on there?
It might not even play games. I mean, at this point, anything is possible.
It could be a toaster. This just seems to be a kind of big, elaborate post-rationalization of just the frustration of dealing with a platform holder. I mean, these companies do things that are incredibly annoying for developers, and it's only in recent years that they've even slightly tried to make those things better, and some good progress has been made there. So I think rather than kind of, it was interesting to me that one of the people who was most sort of annoyed with this was Shahid Ahmad, who used to work in developer relations at Sony and now is a board member of Double 11, a well-known games industry personality. He was on Twitter And he was really condemning this statement. He said it was really unprofessional and just the wrong thing to be saying. Because I think he, more than anyone else, knows the effort that platform holders have been making to try and make things better. But the arcane and strange workings of these companies is not something that you can even slightly expect to change overnight.
Well, I'm afraid it certainly is unprofessional. Massively criticizing companies like this because your algorithm doesn't tend to get good results. But, I'm not in a position where I'm relying on a platform holder to to get food on my table. So maybe I'd be frustrated if I was.
Let me take the other side of this, though, because sometimes it's really good to have people just go, you know what, I'm just fed up of this, and just throw all their toys out of the pram. Because, in fact, developers are actually very compliant with this stuff. We put up with a lot of stuff in order to get into the places that we want. And so having someone who is being, I guess, unreasonable here could be a good thing. If there's now an expectation, the distance that we've come where an indie developer can say, hey, you're doing the wrong thing by indie developers in public and get attention for it and have that be a meaningful statement that we're willing to consider, then the positive aspect of this is that he has stood up and said that. That is the thing that's annoying to him. We've debated his motivations, we've debated how realistic it is, but he hates this and he's taking a stand on it. So I guess I admire that outside, the professionalism angle.
Good.
Good. More professionalism now. Controversial esports personality James Too Good Harding was fired in the middle of a broadcast yesterday from Shanghai's Perfect World Dota 2 tournament. In fact, it may have been today, time zones, etc. Although an official reason has not yet been given, this appeared to be due to the fact that Too Good refused to throw to a logo screen and a countdown timer during what was meant to be a break, instead choosing to keep broadcasting and conducting humorous interviews with members of a panel. Should esports broadcasting become more professional?
Yes, it should. Definitely, professionalism would help. And should this guy have been fired? Well, if he refused to do what his producer was telling him to do, then yes, it's not complicated.
Oh, really? Well, that's interesting because fans at the tournament are getting massively irritated by these really long countdown screens. We've talked about this before where they just show a logo and they play some music. And what Too Good was doing was he had been employed to be an entertaining host. And he said that he was told before the tournament to, quote, be himself, which, given this guy's history, which is astonishing the number of times he's got into trouble for things he's done on air, since the mid-90s, in fact, to tell someone like that and then come down on hard on them for not throwing to a break is kind of astonishing to me.
Well, those breaks are incredibly annoying. Don't get me wrong, I'd much rather have this guy talk to his panel mates than watch these interminable break screens. That's absolutely true, but at some point, him just refusing to do what he's being told on a kind of point of order like that is something that you can't work with. I mean, it's the simple fact is that it could have been a sponsor screen, and then you'd be in real trouble.
Sure.
Of course fans are annoyed about it. You're not firing him because the fans were upset about this. You're firing him because you can't work with someone that especially in a live environment. You do have to have some expectation that you're not going to have a real explosion on your hands. So I'm just like, if you're working on TV or anything approximating TV and you don't follow the schedule as a presenter, as a broadcaster, then I'm not surprised if you're gotten rid of.
I think that's fair enough, but this is a really interesting tension between a somewhat, trying to bring in those TV values and then acting on them. They fired him after the link and he just had to leave. And that caused this amazing output. Like the Twitch chat for the event has been unusable because of people spamming "Give James" with the little diatribe ASCII man. So that's happened, and all of the topics on Reddit are just about how unfair this is. They're not about the tournament. They're massively criticizing the tournament. This kind of, I don't know if fans want TV style production actually, and I don't know if they want these values.
Well, I mean, look, would it be been better to quietly let him go after the event? Yes. On the other hand, there's every chance that you're legitimately worried that something bad might happen between him showing that he's actually willing to refuse to do what the producer of the show is asking, and the end of the tournament. So if I'm the producer and I want to keep my job, that's actually a tough decision, but I'm probably on the side of we need to get rid of the guy who might actually do something illegal on air. I mean, maybe you're going to say that's sort of overreacting, but again, I mean, that's something that I'm going to worry about when I feel like I really don't have control over the person who is talking onto my live air. I mean, yeah, of course, people, you know, I mean, the larger question you're saying, you know, do you want professionalism, or is this supposedly some kind of playground for the subversive because this is video games and not sort of boring sport? I mean, I'm so conservative. I would never be against professionalism, but of course, a lot of other people who are different to me would be for a more anarchic thing. Like people always ask that. You know, people want to have a rigid structure, but then they always celebrate the chaos, even when the chaos isn't. Chaos is very rarely long term a good thing for a sport or anything else, but in short term, it's always absolutely great fun.
I feel like it's interesting to me, this specific disagreement. I mean, it really does seem to be due to this. It hasn't been confirmed yet. This specific disagreement over, you know, whether he should have gone to this break or not. I think the level to which hosts of these things are required to basically create structure themselves. You know, I've heard so many things about esports events where the production is just in disarray and someone is normally left just talking to a camera on their own, off their own back to try and save it, i.e. the host. So I think in that culture, this sort of semi-professional culture, what he did is not like a TV presenter going off and doing that. He would have some expectation that, you know, he's also responsible for the production to some extent.
I think it's a reasonable point, but I'm still imagining that someone said in his ear, "Okay, please throw to break," and he just, you know, he was ignoring it. So, I think you make a sort of a reasonably compelling point, but I still think that at some point he was doing something which is unacceptable in a professional environment, because he wasn't put in a situation where he'd lost all contact with the booth and he didn't know what was happening, or, you know, it wasn't completely clear what he was supposed to be doing. That's not my understanding of the situation. Again, we don't have full knowledge of this. You know, it's a thing that could be read differently, and it could be different personalities would wing that in different ways. It just sounds like he didn't do what his boss asked him to do.
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, the other thing here, I think, finally, is that he might be a relic of the previous era, because he, as I said, he's done stuff like this. You know, he's been fired so many times for so many different casting jobs. He's made so many offensive remarks and so on. And the fact that if they wanted a host who wasn't liable to do ridiculous stuff, why did they hire him in a million years?
Yeah, I mean, I presume he'll get hired again. I mean, obviously, he's popular and he's got this brand now. But, you know, I mean, you say, why would you hire him? I mean, this happens all the time. People, you know, producers and showrunners are, you know, it's kind of just a massive gamble. But you've got this thing you can get cheaply, this person who is popular, that there's a 80% chance that you're just going to get, like, a great performance out of him for a quarter of the money as it would cost for someone who's going to guarantee to give that performance, and there's a 20% chance something bad's going to happen. When that bad thing happens, you know, no one just goes, well, that was what we got ourselves in for. They always just get annoyed and throw a tizzy fit. But it's, you know, that happens a lot. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I guess I would reverse those probabilities in this case, but there you go. Right, that's the end of that, and now it's time to sashay in our wizard's robes gently into the antechamber of Ian's Magic Corner. So take it away, Ian.
Hello and welcome to Ian's Magic Corner. We've been away for a while, but I was at the pub with Visiting the Village Magic the Gathering correspondent Tom Richards, and he talked about something called the Reserved List. Now, this is like a thing that's been in existence for 15 years. This is not a new concept, so any kind of even mild Magic fans probably know all about this, but I thought you and I should talk about this because there's some very interesting aspects here. Basically, a company making a decision that was pro-consumer a long time ago, and then the question of whether they should stand by it. So back in like really the early days of Magic, in 1999 or something, so the relatively early days of Magic, I can't remember the exact card this was, but Wizards basically reprinted a very valuable old card, and this got this incredibly negative reaction from the hardcore collectors, because they'd got these cards that were worth sort of £50 or £100, and suddenly, because of this reprinting, they were worth almost nothing at all. Now, with hindsight, how they responded to this would seem like a massively unnecessary overreaction, because we know that the future was for Magic the Gathering to become a pretty massive success, and people getting upset about this kind of thing probably wasn't going to have any long-term negative effects. But what they decided to do was create a list of cards that they promised never to reprint, called the reserved list. Now, this was, again, apparently it's 1996, so this is 20 years ago. And the real question is, should they still stick to it? They've got a real problem, apparently. There are a couple of cards which should be Modern and Legacy staples, but are extremely rare, and it would be probably better for the metagame if Wizards were, in inverted commas, allowed to reprint it. But so far, they are standing by this kind of promise they made 20 years ago. They stopped adding any new cards to the reserved list quite shortly after they created it. And any time anyone's managed to get any kind of comment from Wizards on it, it has been of the order of like, that was a big mistake. We wished we hadn't done that. And that's very forthcoming as Wizards go. So what do you think of that?
I have a question here, which is that this thing about the card not being printed again in a functionally identical form.
Yeah.
So there's a lot about people want to use these reserve list cards in play, and so replicating them will have a gameplay effect, or is it just about the value for collectors?
So this is about... so the reserve list was created in order to mollify collectors. But the issue now, the people who would be pushing for the reserved list to be repealed would be players. Right. Again, I'm sorry that I've forgotten. There's one really, really clear card which kind of, it would be very good for those formats if it was reprinted.
So therefore, why not make a new card that has the same function that just looks totally different with a different name, and then surely that preserves the value, because the value of first editions of stuff is incredibly important, and not least if the first edition inverted commas is a different thing.
Well, the thing is, so I know what you mean in principle, but because there was talk about whether they were just going to get round it at the time, they made quite a harsh definition of what functionally identical means.
Right. Now,
I think that there have been instances of reprints which are functionally identical but have a different name. But for the purposes of this thing that they created as a modification to fans, they have precluded within it the ability to do that. They've said it's got to be if a card has the same type, subtypes, abilities, mana cost, power, and toughness, then it is deemed to be functionally identical. So, and it's not like this is sort of a hugely granular game where you could just add one to the power of a specific creature and it would be sort of broadly the same. Pretty much when you change any one of these fundamental aspects of a card, it drastically changes it. So it would either be completely useless or completely overpowered.
I'm still not sure though why that affects value. Like if a card existed that was functionally identical, why does it affect value? Monetary value.
Right. So, I would say the most predominant driver of what the current value of a Magic card is how many decks would use that card, combined with obviously how many there are of it. So,
right.
if you've got a card which is desirable in a lot of decks and there aren't very many of it, that's going to have a higher value, and when you reprint it, even if you completely change its name, it's not going to change that it's being used and can be used in deck X, then that's going to significantly lower the value.
Oh, okay, so yes, so it is game.
It is, yes. The valuation
right.
of the majority of cards is to do with gameplay. Obviously, the cards that have been banned, the so-called Power 9, etc., their value is based on something else. But for the vast majority of cards, it is gameplay concerns.
Right, so with that understanding, I mean, I don't think they can revoke this, really, because it's such a hardcore thing. It's such a core promise to make to a collector, and obviously the very, very hardcore of players are the players that they need to keep on side most. Yeah, I don't think you can really go back on this now.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. I think it's totally not worth it. And it is only a limited list of cards. It's not like it's a general rule for all cards or anything. It's a relatively small list of cards. To me, it's pretty clearly not worth it. Wizards are a company a little bit like Valve. They really don't like people being upset with them. They're not a company that just has no interest in what the prevailing current public opinion is. They really don't like having a load of people really angry about it. So I don't think there's any question really that they will repeal it, even though a lot of people want them to. And I'm sure there's a lot of stuff within them talking about how it's just kind of a bit of a thorn in their side. But really, one of the things that's so fascinating about this is Magic is such a long-running game. And you've got this kind of bizarre public relations thing that happened actually 20 years ago, still having a big impact today. Like, the history of Magic is so rich and amazing. Yeah. And, I was trying to think of other games, in computer games that have a chance to be this long-standing. I mean, Counter-Strike is pretty much the only one I could come up with that sort of has the ability to possibly be like a 30-year game.
Yeah, no, it is very rare that you have something kind of this stature. This is getting towards chess stature, I guess, isn't it? That kind of, that
or Monopoly, more depressingly.
Monopoly, human game existence. It is incredible. No, I find this stuff endlessly fascinating. A good Magic corner there. Right, I want to move on to my corner now, which is flexible in many ways. And this, I've been thinking about this recently. I've been reading quite a lot more, and I've been watching some interviews with various writers of literature. And I was thinking about why game designers aren't interviewed in the same way as writers. So writers will be asked questions like, what do you think is the effect of Freud on modernism? And how do you relate these two concepts together, these two abstract philosophical concepts? They'll be asked this in Q&A sessions for, something like the New Yorker, like a major kind of outlet that's doing a show. They have a writer on the stage, and the writer will give his or her thoughts on those issues. And game designers tend to be asked, I mean, we're starting to do interviews. You will be asked questions about story, which is interesting because you don't do that. And you'll be asked things, what the player can do, but you won't be asked about, the influence of a particular game design philosophy on your design.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of entertaining answers to this question. Maybe we'll get onto some of those, but I think that probably the honest truth is that, I think that games are so complicated that, we talk on high level. Like I will say that Frozen Synapse, it was really literally the design was a cross between Laser Squad Nemesis and Counter-Strike. I wanted to make the kind of mechanics I felt while playing Counter-Strike within the general metagame of Laser Squad Nemesis. And that makes sense. And I can talk about that. But then what I think Counter-Strike means in that context is going to be different to everyone else. We don't have a good language for it, and I think that's mainly because it's just so complicated and extremely subjective. Obviously, there are a million different things going on in Counter-Strike. I'm talking about how the precise mechanics of entering a room, the decisions I've made up to the breaching a room point that have all the impact on how likely I am to succeed, that kind of thing. So I'm already trying to get more specific there. Even then, that's going to be hard for me to get into a productive discussion with someone where we're just talking in the same vein, and we can all have this lovely flowery discussion about how we felt when we played Counter-Strike and how we did it when we were teenagers and just being dumped by someone else. You can have that conversation over and over and over again. But I just think game design is so complicated. There's so many different moving parts that it might just be not something you can have a very specific discourse about. easily. Like, you know, if you spend a week writing an article about a really small part of game design, maybe you can get down to it in a way that you can communicate. I just don't think it's very easy to talk about.
I would guess, though, that you could say the same thing about literature. You could say that literature has a kind of, you know, irreducible complexity or whatever. But what I'm kind of going for here is that I don't feel that game designers are not expected to be intellectuals, and writers are. You know, writers are expected to know about the theoretical basis for what they're doing. They're expected to be able to cite their own work within that of their contemporaries. And game designers aren't. They're treated like mechanics, like people who are doing a functional job.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is more blue collar. There's a statement. I think it is more like engineering than well, certainly the writing is, because so much of your job as a game designer is making something that just works. You know, it's the basics of a book and telling a story. I mean, yeah, sure, you have to tell a story in a good way and everything, but you know, in general, most people can kind of write down a few sentences, can convey a general sequence of events, can describe a conversation between two people or how someone is feeling about something. So much of a game is about making the experience like even slightly enjoyable. So I think that there is a lot of just like detail work, like building a bridge. You know, a lot of it is about trying to make sure that the bridge is strong in every single area. Or the notes are going to be about what is really dangerously wrong, rather than sort of, I think that the RNG value for X decision should be slightly higher. You know, that's obviously, you do get those kind of notes, but they're a much smaller percentage. I mean, it would be nice, but I don't feel particularly intellectual in that area. Like, it doesn't really vibe with my experience of game design. Game design is kind of like, it's not a kind of a thing where I go and I get a load of cultural stuff. I maybe go to a art exhibit or smoke weed next to a river or something, and then kind of have all these ideas that then sort of flow through me into something. Like, that's kind of not really the experience of designing for me.
But that's not what writers do either. That's the romanticized idea of what writers do. Writing is very functional, and it's about constructing, you know, a narrative that works, and it's about organizing words into paragraphs and cutting and moving around blocks of text. It's kind of a sculptural thing as well.
Yeah, that's
you
true.
could say. Writers are just expected to know about ideas, and game designers aren't. And something interesting that happens with musicians, some musicians want to be in that intellectual role, and some don't. And you can see the difference in how they're interviewed. You know, some musicians won't talk about process, or, you know, if they're an electronic musician, they'll only talk about technology. They won't talk about creativity. Whereas some musicians, you know, will say, yeah, I read Gravity's Rainbow and I had a vivid, lucid dream about my dead father, and then I wrote this piece of music. So I just don't. It's interesting to me that why these different disciplines are treated differently. I don't think there's that much difference between them, actually.
I'm not getting very far trying to get to the bottom of it. Like, it's just, I guess a lot of the reasons you do things are boring. Well, but then that's true of writing as well. I understand that. Maybe it's just easier to talk about a micro concept from a book. Like, you can say, I really liked the piece of metaphor of when Julia was likening her ex to a vase on the wall or something. Like, I can very easily talk about that with you, and you'll know what I mean, and we can have a conversation about it. But if I try and talk about, I mean, you know, look at how hard it was for us to talk about RNG, and like it's just kind of, because I can't even easily think of a time when RNG was great. Like, oh, that time I got that weapon in Diablo, that was a great piece of RNG. Like, maybe there's a language there. I just feel like it's hard to immediately communicate on it.
Right, interesting. That's enough of that high-level discussion. Now we get down to the nitty-gritty of the games that were released this week in 2006. Thanks to Eurogamer and producer Jimmy back on duties again. So, the 24th of February 2006, we have Ford Street Racing on the Xbox, PS2,
Very
and PC.
exciting.
That sounds like the most budget racing game. I know you have high performance Fords. I'm just saying. I'm just imagining this kind of like angry Mondeo drivers. I don't know why I find that
Well,
so
you
funny.
drive a Ford, so.
I do. It's so hilariously pathetic. Toka Race Driver 3 on the Xbox, PS2, and PC.
I'm going to take a
games.
wild gamble and say that sold better than Ford Street Racing.
You would hope so. Black on Xbox and PS2. Now, Black was an FPS, wasn't it? I think?
Yeah, it was an FPS. There's this kind of legendary story that at I don't know, Tokyo Game Show or something, word came down to the guys who were making and showing off Black that Shigeru Miyamoto wanted to see it. Shigeru Miyamoto had some massive intrigue in it, and they set up a private viewing for him, and he came and he played it like in silence for 5 minutes, and then kind of smiled and left, and they were pretty sure he didn't like it. That's pretty much the best thing I have to say about Black.
That sounds great. Whack-A-Mole on the DS and GBA. Now, is this just a Whack-A-Mole mini-game?
I mean...
Is that what that is? I mean, is that the lowest ambition of any game project ever?
Yeah, Whack-A-Mole would be a touchstone for a certain kind of extremely useless game design. So actually making one is pretty good going.
That is impressively low rent. Project 03 The Tormented on the PS2.
Okay, I have no idea what that is.
I'm going to do a stealth Google. Oh, it's a Fatal Frame game.
Oh,
It's
okay.
the
Oh,
third
yeah.
Fatal Frame game. Yeah, we know what that is. The Sword of Etheria on the PS2. All of these games, like, they just have the same, like, Etrian Odyssey and the Sword of Etheria. And is this even yeah, it's a role-playing game. Yeah, I find them so hard to distinguish. Trapped on the PS2. Very annoying spelling.
Yeah, it's also now better known as the name of a band. But the
Right.
game itself looks like a 3D dungeon crawler.
It's an action video game with strategy game elements, released in Japan as Kagero 2 Dark Illusion, which I think is a much better name.
We
better name.
could argue about that one.
Alien Hominid on the PC. Yes.
Yes.
Talk game. A talk game. We always have to celebrate.
I do not think Alien Hominid is a talk game.
Alien Hominid is a talk game, isn't it?
Don't think so.
It totally is.
I think you're thinking about
Oh, I'm thinking about the other thing.
yeah, I'm afraid
Yeah.
not.
Oh, it's the Behemoth. That's right. It's the Behemoth's first
Yeah.
game, and they went on to do Castle Crashers and all of that stuff.
Well, we talked about this a
That's
couple of weeks ago because it came out on the GBA, apparently.
Right.
Supposedly before it came out on the PC, which doesn't sound very right. But
No, that doesn't sound right. Crash Day on the PC. Now, I like to think of this as kind of a garbage day style horror movie. In fact, it's just another racing game with a terrible name. EverQuest 2, Kingdom of Sky, which I guess is an expansion
yeah,
pack.
probably an expansion pack.
For EverQuest 2. Galciv 2 Dreadlords.
Galciv
which is
2 was really
also,
good. I like Galciv 2.
I tried to play it once, but it didn't work. Hammer and Sickle on the PC, which I doubt very much is a Karl Marx walking simulator.
I actually own this, although
yeah?
I don't really know why. I'm not sure I've played it.
What is it?
I think it's a turn-based tactics game.
It is a turn-based. Oh, it looks amazing.
It does look quite amazing.
It looks amazing. We should play this. Wow! The UI fills over 50% of the screen, and there's a tiny like window with some really bad pixelated men and some disembodied heads talking to each other. It looks amazing. Right, we should play that. We should stream that. It should be the only game we ever stream. Keepsake on the PC.
I don't know what any of these things are.
This is a weird week, man. There's some
All
really
of these
weird
games
stuff.
as well. I have to keep adding game to the end of the Google search because
This it looks like a point and click
Oh,
game
yeah.
with very badly 3D modeled characters. Amazing. Locomania on the PC. This is like weird PC dumping week. This week.
yeah.
Locomania is a game that imitates the duties of a train dispatcher. pretty early for the simulator genre, and it does look amazing as well. Very low poly hillsides with trains on them. Narc on the PC. Again, not doing anything to confound what I just said there, Narc. Oh, this was a light gun game, Narc,
Oh, cool.
I believe. Am I correct about that?
You could be right.
No. I think it's a third-person action game, actually. I think Retsuplay did a Let's Play of this because it's terrible. Tycoon City New York on the PC. Sounds like a boring business game. Onimusha 3 Demon Siege on the PC. Never played an Onimusha game. I don't think I ever will. Kaloom.
Yeah, this is like a Columns clone, but spelled Kaloom.
K-O-L-O-O-M-N. Kaloom. Kaloom. Mega Man Maverick Hunter X on the PSP. The Mega Man franchise went really wrong after a certain point, and this is after that point. Beautiful Joe Double Trouble on the DS. People loved Beautiful Joe when it came out, and I played it on the GameCube, and I thought it was a load of...
Yeah, I'm afraid I also had no time for it.
Buster Move
Got
DS.
time for that, though.
DS. That's a good game. Right, that's enough of that. Now we catapult ourselves unwillingly into the present day, and we delve into the top 10 UK Steam games. And at number 10, it's Grand Theft Auto 5. At number 9, it's Factorio. Good to see Factorio getting some love. Kind of somewhat in the Big Pharma / Infinifactory genre. You make a big factory. It's sort of one of those number tweaking games. Unbelievably not published by Cliff Harris this time. Ashes of the Singularity at number 8. Now, I don't know about this. I'm going to bet that it's some kind of RPG. Let me just quickly look at that. It's not. It's an RTS. There you go. Planetary warfare on a massive scale. It looks like a Subcom clone to me. And it's in early access. These RTSs, man.
Yeah, RTS is getting a little mini resurgence.
It is. Portal Knights at number 7. Don't know what that is.
No, I don't know what that is either.
Is it this week in the year is Weird PC Week? It's been happening every year since 2006.
That's great.
Portal Knights is an action-packed crafting adventure across whimsical 3D sandbox worlds.
Okay.
Good
Not
Lord.
not the Baywatch Knights of the Portal franchise, unfortunately.
Fallout 4 Season Pass at number 6.
Boo.
Armor 3 at number 5, 50% off. Grim Dawn.
I haven't
at
heard of
number
any
4.
of these.
What's going on? It's such a weird week. Grim Dawn, 10% off. Grim Dawn is a classic action role-playing from the lead gameplay designer of Titan Quest.
Oh.
It features satisfying combat, strategic character development, frenzied loot collection.
Because we all want
quests
that.
With choice and consequence. Number 3 is Tom Clancy's The Division, pre-order. Number 2 is this Master of Orion reboot thing.
Okay.
Which I'm intrigued by. And number 1 is Super Hot.
Go Super Hot.
We had a discussion about... Read some reviews of Super Hot. I bought it today. I haven't played it yet. I played through the original thing. It looked like they kind of done the minimum necessary to succeed. Very short campaign. Not much sort of secondary stuff added. It's like a 2-hour game, I think. And it's at number 1 on Steam, which is incredible.
Yeah, people seem relatively happy with it. Like, there are quite a lot of non-story-based modes. But, you know, it's an event. They seem to be spending quite a lot on marketing now. They weren't necessarily yesterday, but they are now. Nice work, Super. I'm going to play it. I want an opinion on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to play it at some point if I ever have any spare time ever again, which is incredibly unlikely. But yes, yeah, I mean, there are some negative reviews saying not enough content, but it just proves, you don't need content if your game idea is interesting enough. We rapidly move on to the television and film lounge area, where you want to talk about The Ringer some more.
Yeah, after we talked about it last week, I listened to a big podcast by Bill Simmons talking about stuff, so I can tell you that The Ringer was a new name for this website. I know everyone was very worried. They didn't know the answer to that question.
Right, yes.
He wanted to call it Binge Mode when he was drunk, but his colleagues told him he wasn't allowed to do that when he was sober.
I like that.
I quite like it. I think it's probably best they didn't call it that.
I agree.
I can't remember what else. Oh yeah, so it turns out it's not being paid for by HBO, in fact. He's paying for it himself. And he's, I hope he has enough time. Like making a new weekly TV show is quite a big commitment, but he's hired a bunch of people who are good. So I'm still incredibly excited about it. and everything continues to be exciting. He's doing the first few articles are being published via newsletter. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about. He was like, so Bill Simmons has been writing for the internet for like 18 years. And he was like, yeah, well, this is the first time I didn't know how to make a website. Like, every single other time he's done it, he's just sort of, ESPN or whoever have published his content, or back in the very early days, he was using like a sort of a Identikit blogging tool. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, that you can have these guys who are big internet personalities, but they don't actually know how to use the internet to put their stuff out. I thought that was interesting.
Right, yeah. I mean, he's really from the era where, you just sort of worked to get your content on a thing. You didn't ever have to make the thing. And now the internet and the world is such that generally, unless you're willing to work within the established bounds of something else, which he clearly isn't at this point in his career, you have to make the thing yourself. So hopefully he's not trying to do that. I'm sure he's off to a great start with this newsletter idea. That doesn't sound like it's going to go terribly wrong in any way.
I mean, it is just what they're doing, like for the 2 months before the site goes live. And I do kind of think it is quite a good idea. I think it's going to get him a lot of subscribers to his. He'll get a lot of people's email addresses like that.
That's true.
And I think, honestly, he can basically do absolutely anything. I think the fans of his writing are so rabid that he could do almost anything, and people would find a way of consuming it.
That's true. Yeah, no, it will be interesting to see if this works. I also agree, I complained about Grantland almost exclusively last time because there's so much to complain about it. But it will be interesting to see. As I told you recently, I'm currently reading the Masked Man's book, which I believe is called Inside the Squared Circle.
Great name.
I know that book wrong. It's about the history of professional wrestling. And that's really interesting. And the Masked Man is a great writer, and he was one of my favourite parts of Grantland. So yes, I am buying into my own little corner of the Grantland experience. The problem with this book and with books like it, though, is that they often start in the very distant past with the origins of wrestling, which I'm not finding particularly interesting because it's all kind of fairly obvious. It just started with some people smashing each other up with chairs for money.
Yeah, I also find the origins, specifically of pro wrestling, to be really unromantic. It didn't come from a very glamorous place, let me tell you.
No.
And I guess real wrestling fans might want to hear about that, although for me it kind of sort of I don't like to think about when it was like that.
I think there are some things where a lot of the interest in romanticism is in the fact that they're already a kind of massively complicated and hard to understand system. So looking back at when it was a simple system is not what the casual observer is immediately interested in. And yet so many books take a historical perspective.
Good point, sir. Good point.
Although, I have to say on the flip side of that, something like The Ultimate History of Video Games, which is one of my favourite non-fiction books, is historical, but somehow manages to make that work in a very effective way. So it might be about how you do it stylistically. Anyway, that's enough of that. It's been a good week. We don't have any listener questions this week. We gave you a break, and we seem to have managed to have filled nearly 2 hours of show without you. So maybe we don't need you. I'm just kidding. We do need you. Send your listener questions to me on Twitter for next week. I'm Mode7Games. You can follow Ian as well. He's Ian Hardingham. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you and goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.